All right, let's talk about something that rarely gets named out loud, but is felt deeply by the men who live it: the quiet strength of older men. Not the kind of strength that announces itself, not the kind that competes, not the kind that needs witnesses, the kind that shows up slowly, over time, shaped by experience, loss, responsibility, and restraint. Because if you're an older man, there's a good chance you don't recognize your own strength anymore. Not because it isn't there, but because it doesn't look like the version of strength you were taught to admire when you were younger. When you were younger, strength was loud. It was physical. It was about pushing, achieving, enduring, proving. It was about how much you could carry, how fast you could move, how little you needed help. Strength was visible, measurable, and often validated by others. But life has a way of changing the definition. Somewhere along the way, often quietly, you learned that real strength isn't always about adding more force. Sometimes it's about knowing when not to use it at all. One of the first quiet strengths older men develop is restraint. Not because they've become passive, but because they've learned the cost of unnecessary conflict. They've seen what happens when pride drives decisions. They've watched relationships fracture over words that didn't need to be spoken. They've felt the long tail of short-term reactions. So they pause. They choose their battles. They let things pass that once would have provoked them. They understand that not every disagreement requires dominance. That restraint isn't weakness, it's earned discernment. Another quiet strength is emotional endurance. Older men have lived through things that didn't come with instructions. Losses that couldn't be fixed, disappointments that couldn't be reframed, changes they didn't ask for and couldn't avoid. They learned how to keep going even when clarity wasn't available, how to wake up and function when motivation was low, how to carry responsibility without applause. You may not have labeled that as strength at the time. You were just doing what needed to be done. But looking back, it becomes obvious you endured without becoming bitter. Or if bitterness showed up, you worked your way through it. That's not accidental. That's strength that deepens with age. Older men also develop a kind of strength that comes from perspective. When you've seen cycles repeat, trends rise and fall, people come and go, crises flare and fade, urgency loses some of its power over you. You don't react to everything like it's the end of the world. You know most things pass. You know emotions peak and settle. You know life rarely unfolds the way you expect, and yet it still unfolds. That perspective creates calm. And calm is one of the most underrated forms of strength there is. In a world that constantly escalates, the man who remains steady becomes an anchor. People feel it when they're around him. Conversations slow down, reactions soften. There's room to breathe. That's not because he's trying to lead. It's because his nervous system has learned regulation. Another quiet strength older men carry is self-knowledge. You know your patterns now. You know what triggers you. You know what drains you. You know what brings you peace. You're less tempted by novelty for novelty's sake. Less seduced by external validation. Less interested in proving you still have it. Not because you don't have it, but because you no longer need to demonstrate it. That internal orientation changes how you move through the world. You're less reactive to judgment, less destabilized by rejection, less concerned with being misunderstood. You've learned that not everyone needs to get you. That acceptance is strength. There's also a quiet strength in how older men relate to time. You feel it differently now. You notice seasons. You notice how quickly years pass. You understand that time is not infinite and that awareness sharpens your values. You become more intentional with your energy, more selective with your commitments, more aware of what actually matters to you. This isn't withdrawal. It's refinement. You don't rush as much. You don't chase as hard. You don't fill every silence. You allow moments to exist without forcing meaning onto them. That presence, real presence, is powerful. Another strength that deepens with age is humility. Not the self-deprecating kind, but the grounded kind. You've been wrong enough times to respect complexity. You've seen certainty fail. You've learned that confidence doesn't require having all the answers. So you listen more. You ask better questions. You recognize that wisdom often comes from curiosity, not certainty. That humility doesn't diminish you. It makes you trustworthy. People sense when a man isn't trying to dominate the conversation or control the outcome. They relax. They open up. They share things they wouldn't normally say. That's influence without force. Older men also carry a quiet strength in their ability to tolerate discomfort. Not because they enjoy it, but because they've learned it's survivable. They've lived through enough uncertainty to know that panic doesn't help. They don't need everything resolved immediately. They don't need every emotion explained away. They don't need every situation to make sense right now. That tolerance creates stability in relationships, in families, in communities. It's the kind of strength people lean on without even realizing they're doing it. Another quiet strength is the ability to forgive, or at least loosen the grip of resentment. Not perfectly, not all at once, but enough to keep moving forward. Holding on to anger becomes heavier with age, not morally, physically, emotionally. You feel the cost more clearly. So many older men learn, slowly, that forgiveness is less about excusing others and more about reclaiming their own peace. That decision, made repeatedly over time, is strength. There's also a quiet strength in survival itself. If you're an older man, you've outlived versions of yourself you once thought were permanent. You've adapted to a body that changes. You've recalibrated identity more than once. You are here. That matters. You may not feel celebrated for it, but endurance counts, whether it's acknowledged or not. One of the most overlooked strengths older men have is their capacity to mentor, even informally. Not by lecturing, but by modeling. You don't need to tell younger men what to do. Your presence does it for you. How you respond under pressure, how you treat people when there's nothing to gain, how you handle disappointment. Those things are noticed, even when no one says it out loud. Another quiet strength is the way older men love. It's often less dramatic, less performative, less consuming, but deeper. It's built on choice, not infatuation, on consistency, not intensity, on showing up, not sweeping gestures. That kind of love doesn't always get romanticized, but it lasts. And then there's this realization that comes with age, one that many men never articulate. You don't need to be extraordinary to be meaningful. You don't need to leave a massive legacy. You don't need to be remembered by everyone. You don't need to prove you mattered. You already have. In the lives you touched, in the responsibilities you carried, in the ways you showed up when it counted. The quiet strength of older men isn't about domination or visibility. It's about steadiness, presence, depth, perspective. It's about knowing when to act and when to wait, when to speak and when to listen, when to push and when to let go. If you're an older man and you felt invisible lately, consider this. Quiet strength often goes unnoticed because it doesn't demand attention. But that doesn't make it weak. It makes it rare. And in a world addicted to noise, rare forms of strength matter more than ever. You may not feel powerful in the way you once imagined power, but you carry something far more enduring. You carry gravity. And gravity doesn't shout, it holds.